little, we lived in Japan, the home of anime. And when I was 5 years old, my parents, my brother, and I, we were moved to Germany, where my brother and I took horse acrobatics lessons. That is not what I'm going to talk about. On the way to Germany, we stopped off in India, and my parents sent us to Madras, now called Chennai, to visit a favorite aunt. My brother and I were so happy because she had a great house, huge lawns, there were horses to ride outside, and she had 2 dogs. There was the Cocker Spaniel named Pebbles, and a German Shepherd named Bush. Now, pay attention, because every one of these details will be important. One day, my brother and I come back from horse riding and find the house in complete disarray. See, my aunt has fallen off a horse, injured her back badly, and Pebbles has got out of the house and has been bitten by a dog and is bleeding. Now, when my brother and I come back, we are told, it's too horrible, you cannot look. But my brother says he can actually remember seeing Pebbles bleeding in the distance. Now, we are put away in a room with my aunt and my cousin, and that day or later on, maybe the next day, Pebbles dies. And then Bush is put down. And it's so horrible that my aunt sends us back to Delhi, where my grandfather, who was a Major General in the Indian Army, took us for our rabies shots to the military hospital. Now, I don't know what you remember or know about rabies shots in the 1970s, but they had to be given intramuscularly, which meant in the stomach. And if you're an adult, you had 14. I was lucky. I was only a child of 5, so I only had to have 7. Now, here's the thing. My brother had a real phobia of injections. And I know what you're thinking, Amit, everybody hates injections, but not the way my brother did. Because every day he would say, today I'm going to be okay. Today I'm going to be okay. And every day he would kick and shout and scream. And every day the doctors and nurses would give up. And every day I would hear this announcement on the hospital PA system, to order to the injector room place, to order to the injector room place, which translated is 2 orderlies to the injection room. And these 2 big military guys, the orderlies, would come, grab my brother, slam him down, and inject him. And I would be left a little bit shocked, traumatized. Now fast forward 25 years. And I'm telling this story to a biology class, maybe one that kind of similar to where Amira and Julia were last year. And I'm telling this story, and it suddenly hits me. This doesn't make any sense. Did you all catch the detail in that story that made no sense at all? Let me rewind for you. Because you see, rabies is transmitted primarily through puncture wounds. And sometimes rarely, through infected saliva on an open wound, but never, I'm pretty sure never, has it ever been transmitted by viewing a dog bleeding in the distance. And so when I give you this detail, that my brother and I were never really at risk, it changes that story a bit, doesn't it? It changes how you view the entire story just with that little detail. And I'm pretty sure there's never going to be a multi-million-dollar franchise about it. But I view it something like this. What if one day, maybe in the 7th book of the Harry Potter baby saga, Harry Potter wakes up, does this, and goes, ah, that's not a birthmark. It just came off. Now, the adventures will still happen, and maybe you would think the writing is still pretty good, but that detail would surely change things. Because it is details like that that set a hero apart. It's small details like that that set a hero out on his journey alone. And you see, as humans, we love a good story. We love a rewarding narrative. In fact, we love it so much that we feel slightly let down when the details don't match the story that we like. So some of you might have seen this picture a few months ago. It was tweeted by Andrew Harper, who works for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And he had this wonderful picture that shows his colleagues helping Marwan, a refugee in Syria who had been separated from his parents. And it was picked up by CNN and was retweeted. And the article was about how Marwan had crossed the desert alone, separated from his parents. And so, of course, as you can imagine, there were thousands of tweets and forum posts expressing sympathy. And in fact, Time magazine, I think, had a wonderful line where they said, sometimes an image can cut through the fog to illustrate a simple truth in a way no amount of words or numbers ever could. Now, there's no doubt about the extent of human suffering in Syria. And there's no doubt that a picture can, in fact, say 1,000 words about the human condition. But just not this image. Because a few weeks later, this clarifying image was published, in which, as you can see, Marwan was in fact separated from his family, but not by hundreds of kilometers, but by 100 meters. And so he didn't have to cross the desert alone. Now that doesn't change the human tragedy. It's never easy to leave your home. It couldn't possibly have been easy. And you would think that we would have been relieved to read this. We would have been overjoyed. But instead, if you look at the forum posts, the tweets after this, the overwhelming emotion is one of being let down. Feeling cheated that the story wasn't what we were led to believe. And so you see, I think that there's a danger in a good story also. I think there's a danger in a good narrative where we fall in love with the story. We've all become so good at looking at the big picture. We've all been taught to look for the forest, not just the trees. But sometimes those trees, those details, I think they're worth exploring. Because I think they reveal some pretty interesting things, especially in things like journalism. Now, I'm a biology teacher, which means I talk about life all the time. And so I love a good story, because stories reveal so much about life. But I think the challenge is making sure that every story we tell actually fits the details as they get uncovered. Let me give you two examples from biology, or from science. We all love a good David and Goliath story, don't we? Where one individual fights against the system, especially if that system is something huge like the medical community. And so in 2005, Doctors Barry Marshall and Robin Warren were given the Nobel Prize for showing that the Helicobacter pylori bacteria you see on the screen was responsible for stomach ulcers. Now, until then, it had been thought by doctors that it was stuff like stress, spicy foods that caused ulcers. So as you can imagine, this little detail kind of threw their story off. But that's not the story I want to talk about. It's this. This is a line from the IB Biology subject guide. And what the International Baccalaureate want us to talk about is that the story of how they made this discovery and how they struggled to convince the scientific and medical community that that's worth telling. So let me tell it to you a little bit in Barry Marshall's own words. He talks about how everybody was against him, but he knew he was right. And he couldn't find a good animal model to work, so what he did was he took a petri dish of the bacteria, swallows it, develops the ulcers, and then cures himself with antibiotics. This is in about 1983. And in his Nobel Prize Psych biography, he talks about how frustrating it was for him that the medical community was still so slow to come around. That, in his words, millions of patients were suffering while the medical community dragged its feet. Now here's the thing. If you take a look at the details, the story doesn't quite work like that. Because during the time that I'm talking about, from 1981 to 1987, I did a little PubMed search. Some of you know this. It's the search engine that allows me to take a look at published medical papers. And I looked at the papers published from 1981 to 1987. And in those 6 years, there are 350 articles, more or less, about Helicobacter and stomach ulcers. 350 papers, that's about 5 papers a month. And so it isn't at all that it's one individual against the medical system. In fact, the entire medical system is coming together. They're collaborating, they're working together. And it didn't take very long, because by the early 1990s, they had published a consensus paper from the National Institute of Health saying that Helicobacter does in fact cause stomach ulcers. And so while we love this one person against the system story, the details reveal it isn't quite like that. And we like stories with nice endings. And that's a problem in science. Because in science, you just can't have an ending. Every detail leads to another detail. Every answer should lead to more questions. And so, I'm sure you remember this from biology at some point. The fact that acquired characteristics cannot be passed on. I mean, you all know that. If you're training for Ironman, your baby doesn't come out weirdly muscled. And if you learn to ride a bicycle, your children start to learn how to ride bicycles. And so, a scientist some 100 years ago did his reputation no end of harm. This is Lamarck, who suggested, unfortunately for him, that giraffes, because of generation after generation of stretching their neck for the highest leaves, have developed these long necks. Now we know that's not true, thanks to Darwin and Mendel, who put this entire thing to rest, and all is well in the kingdom of biology. And in fact, our biology textbook, one of the ones we use at this school, in fact tells us this, that acquired characteristics would have to somehow modify the DNA. And that's the only way they can be passed on, and that there is no evidence for this, full stop, end of story. But then, what about these great examples that have come out in the past 10 years? So, not surprisingly, if you feed a mouse a certain diet, it becomes obese. But what's far more interesting is this headline, that diet can affect the offspring of those mice, and in fact the offspring of those mice, regardless of what diet you're feeding that third generation. Apparently, the conditions of one mouse can have an influence generations later. And what about this great story? Right? Where they had mice learned to associate a smell with a painful stimulus. Now that's not a surprise. But apparently that could be passed on to subsequent generations, such that in those generations, mice who had never experienced the smell before felt fear even before they experienced that smell for the first time. And so, I think the details do matter. And sometimes they force us in science to let go of the nice story that we'd like to tell. And so, whether my brother and I were ever near the dog, I think has an impact on that story of great woe. And whether Marwan was 100 meters, 100 kilometers from his parents, surely has a difference on how you respond emotionally. And whether it took 2 years or 20 for the science community to come around to a new finding, I think changes how you view science. And if it turns out that some acquired traits can in fact be passed on, I think it might change how we view them. Thank you very much.